Just to cool. Awesome. We're live. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you being on. Thanks for, bearing with me on that, like what seemed like several month long back and forth of email trying to, cross paths because obviously you're an incredibly busy dude and my schedule did not help with that whatsoever.
You know what? It's great though, because I mean, busy people. What's the saying? If you need to get something done, ask a busy person to do it, or something like that. I know there's something good in there. I don't know what it is exactly, but anyhow, here we are, right?
Agreed. Well, awesome. Can you just give a brief little intro about you and what you're doing now, and then we can kind of go
Go back in
back
time.
go back as far as we can and just start from there.
Well, it sounds a bit ridiculous. I mean, I sort of have this crazy job title that's sort of like a sounds like it's from the 1800s, but I'm actually an adventurer. That's what I do, and I do long expeditions, particularly like geographic crossings. So I've crossed. I guess I could start with one of the longest was crossing the Sahara Desert on foot with two buddies of mine, Charlie and Kevin, and we ran approximately 7,500 kilometers, which is about 4,500 miles, rounding numbers off. And then I've crossed other deserts solo. I crossed the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, 2,000 k, and the Atacama Desert, which is actually the driest place on Earth, in Chile, and that's 1,200 kilometers. I've also done multiple Arctic expeditions. I've been to the South Pole and supported, crossed a region of Siberia, and numerous expeditions in the Canadian Arctic. But there's just tons of, and really, the reason I do these things is to support an organization that a very close friend of mine, Bob Cox, and I started together called Impossible to Possible. We started it, 10 years ago now. And we take young people on their own expeditions around the world, and they're free of charge. So my expeditions, in a weird way, sort of support those expeditions and make them happen.
Awesome.
That's what I do.
That's great. And I think how I had like stumbled across you was funny enough, I think on LinkedIn. And I had just like, reached out about what I had seen you were doing with a lot of those treks. And then what kind of sucked me in a little bit more was the fact that you were trying to turn that into more positive experiences for other people. And it was one of the reasons why I started this podcast in the first place, was trying to like get these stories of people that are doing things that are cool, but also doing them in a different way, and also just having some sort of positive impact related to them. So I guess like how did you get to the point where the impossible to possible thing came to fruition, and what led up to that? Because I think what I've seen a lot of, in regards to like pieces that are up online about you, are just kind of like starting from the point of like, okay, I started doing a bunch of these longer runs, and then like one thing led to another, and all of a sudden you're doing all this crazy stuff. What I
I
want to
mean,
kind of get at.
it's not that far off. I mean, look at life is crazy, as people know, and you we all go through ups and downs in our lives. We all have really rough periods in our lives. Anybody that, your listeners, that they know what I'm talking about. Every single, you know what I'm talking about. Every single person, at some point has a low, right, in their life. And I'm 50. I'm going on 50 years of age. So I mean, my generation. I remember I grew up in a small town, and we partied a lot when we were young, probably too much. Like a lot of people did, though. I mean, especially our generation, it seems. I don't know, but anyhow, and one thing led to another. I sort of just, I never really, I was not an academic, and I barely got out of high school. I enrolled in community college and dropped out. Eventually, didn't finish, and I just really became very unhappy with myself and with my life. And this was in my 20s, and I had no in late 20s, and I had no idea what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And for me, in that moment, this is pre Facebook, pre Instagram, pre Twitter, pre being able to really, like, any sort of, even pre, to be honest with you, getting on the internet and being on there and looking resources up or whatever, right? I mean, it just was a different time. It was sort of this transitionary period. Watch the 90s on CNN, that documentary they have, and you'll start to get the vibe of what it was like. But I just didn't know what I was going to do. And I have a brother who's little over a year younger than I am. And he had gone through a sort of life transformation of his own and became this amazing endurance athlete. And it was the things he was taking from his sports that he blew my mind. I mean, the guy went from, being somewhat sedentary and unhealthy to being this like chiseled Ironman athlete and climber and mountain biker and paddler. He did every sport in the outdoors. He was really good at it. And both of us were never really ball sports or hockey guys. It just wasn't our thing, right? We were smoking a pack a day. That's what we were doing, and drinking and just partying. So to see him sort of discover sports that I'd never really heard of. And then my brother and I would watch the Eco Challenge. I don't know if any of your listeners will remember that, but watching the Eco Challenge when it was on Discovery Channel, I guess it was in the late 90s, and being so inspired by these people in combination with what my brother was doing, he convinced me to try and do one of these adventure races with him. And I knew it was a moment for me that I was so inspired by him. He's bringing these things up, and I thought maybe this is the shift I need. Maybe this is the transition. Maybe if I could feel a little bit like he does, my life would be different. And that's sort of what set things in motion. It took me 3 years until 2000 to eventually completely quit smoking, although I fumbled around on a mountain bike from 97 and tried to go climbing with my brother and all these things. But I mean, it was when I really took control of smoking. And that leads me to another point that I've said often to people, is that the most difficult things, the challenges that you face in your life, are very relative to you. So what you find extraordinarily difficult to do, another person may be like, big deal. And that's what smoking was for me. Quitting smoking was so freaking hard for me. And I know a million people that have quit smoking. And maybe they're tougher than I am in some sense. I don't know. But they had no problem. It took me 3 years, dude. Like, I loved smoking, right? So it was really hard for me. So I knew in 2000, when I kicked that habit, that was basically symbolic of everything negative in my life, that my life would be different if I could stay not smoking. If I could control that negative piece of my life, I could start to control the other negative things. And one thing led to another. It's like karma, dude. It's, I believe in that. And the energy you put out there and what you invest in will eventually, hopefully, it works itself out. And so my life changed completely 180 degrees. I went from smoking a pack a day and drinking heavy every day to eating broccoli and riding my mountain bike. And I became an avid mountain biker, and raced mountain bikes, across country and 24-hour solos, and adventure raced and did all that stuff until 2003, when I read my first article about ultra marathons. And my brother was is an amazing runner, but we're built a little bit differently. I'm shorter than he is. And I just saw this long, sinewy guy, my brother, as a runner. So I never really thought it was the sport for me. Compound that with, I grew up with a scoliosis in my spine, all these just things, like my back always hurt. And I thought, I probably shouldn't do that. But you know what? I read this article about ultra marathons, and I thought, this is extraordinary. I can't believe these people can do this. I want to see if I can do this. And a few months later, I was on the start line of my first running race. Like, I had not done a 10K or any of that stuff. I had done multiple adventure races and 24-hour mountain bike races, but never a running race. And it was the Yukon Arctic Ultra Marathon, which was a 100-miler in the Yukon, as the name would sound, in February, and I won it. And I thought to myself, this is what I should do with the rest of my life. And it was never about making money from running, or I never even thought about doing expeditions. It was never anything like, it was just, I was living in a tiny little apartment. I had a futon, my weights, and my mountain bike, and I was happy, right? I was 35 at that point. I was living in the hills here where I live now in Chelsea, Quebec. And I'm like, you know what? This is rad. Like, I'm learning things about myself, and I was becoming a happy person. And in that time, I realized the most important thing you can have in your life is to be happy. Like, everything else is extraneous, right? It's just finding happiness, or what makes you happy, is critically important, because you only have one kick at the can, right? And so I spent first 30 years of my life more or less bouncing in and out of happiness and never really feeling fulfilled, or like I had found passion or any of those things. Then all of a sudden I'm finding it, right? And it just seemed so untapped. It was like I was like meeting someone different, me, for the first time. And I was completely reborn. And running would take me, I say it's been my greatest teacher. It would take me all over the world. I would start doing ultra marathons all over the world. And eventually that would lead us to this Running the Sahara project, where serendipity, 6 degrees of separation, whatever, Matt Damon decided to make a documentary out of our run across the Sahara called Running the Sahara. And I realized in those 111 days that it took us to cross the Sahara, I mean, we ran clear across Libya, Mali, Niger, the power of storytelling and how voracious my appetite was to learn. And I'm on an expedition. I'm running across North Africa and I'm learning about culture and people and the water situation in North Africa and all these things like political implications, socio-environmental issues. I was learning all these things and I'm like friggin' middle-aged. And I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. So I'm on an adventure. You can tell a story about it and hopefully it will inspire others and others will want to learn about it. And at the same time, I'm learning something. And so I thought, what a compelling concept. And so that's how, after the Running the Sahara expedition, I met Bob Cox and my wife, Kathy, and I, the three of us decided to start Impossible to Possible. And I would remain a volunteer, as is my wife, and Bob and his partner, Tria. And we're all volunteers in the organization. And we create these trips where kids get to go on expeditions for free. And ever since then, I've been doing expeditions all over the world. I've done 15 of my own projects around the world. And 15, I think we're on our 15th youth expedition as well.
Awesome.
Sorry, that's sort of a long answer to your question.
No, that was an amazing answer to that question. So what was the process like I'm interested in kind of the in-between. Like, so as you're kind of stepping into this new understanding of the fact that you want to get out a lot more and kind of like try all these new sports, and then all of a sudden that kind of like snowballs into all this stuff that ends up with the Sahara run and then Impossible to Possible. Like, what's happening in those steps between those things where you're kind of understanding that that's the way that you want to go? And like, were there other struggles along the way as those things started to kind of snowball and progress?
Great question. You know what? And let me play devil's advocate with you here for a moment. I think that we tend to overanalyze stuff instead of life having a flow. Instead of thinking, okay, if I do this, this is going to happen. Like, obviously I learned through running concepts that would apply to my life that would be very effective, i.e., I get blisters, don't wear those shoes anymore, right? Mm-hmm. So if something doesn't work, change it. That's what running taught me. So I apply that to my life. If this isn't working, change my path. That sounds like such a simple concept, but for 30 years of my life, I didn't apply even those basic principles. I would instead bang my head against a wall 50 times and something wouldn't work, right? So I think that what we do is we try to overanalyze and micromanage where we think our lives can go based on the minutia of movements that we make, rather than just looking at it from a bigger picture and saying, hey, you know what, this is kind of working or it's not working, or I'm feeling it or I'm not feeling it, and moving into a different direction. The common ground is that you bust your ass for anything that you want to make happen. Nothing in life is easy that you truly derive happiness from. It doesn't just come easy. I mean, okay, occasionally you win the lottery or somebody wins the lottery. I'm sure they're happy for a few months, right? But the point being is, you really think about that in your own life. How the things that you appreciate the most are the things you work the hardest to make happen, right? And that's just there's all of these concepts in life and these old sayings that have been around for a million. You are what you eat. I mean, truly, that applies. So I think that going on these simple concepts, these more simplified approaches, and just living a life that's filled with passion, but and not risk adverse. I mean, willing to take risks, but also not to the detriment of others, hopefully. Like, you have a family, right? So you want to take care of your family. I have daughters, I have a wife. I want to, I find that balance. It's maintaining the balance while finding the passion. And when you start to make those puzzle pieces fit, amazing things happen. So the little pieces in between, I don't overanalyze them. I once had, I do a lot of speaking all over the world. I'm lucky to do that. And I speak for various corporate events, but also a lot of nonprofit events. And I sat down with somebody who gave me really great advice one time. And this was somebody who actually ran for president of the United States. I'm not going to say who it is. But anyhow, he gave me really good advice one time. And he said, I said, wait, so all these years, all these crazy things that have been going on all these years, I said, give me something that, about life that you've learned in these 80 some odd years that you've been trucking. And he said, you know what? I look at my life, look, I'm getting onto a highway on ramp. Are you concerned about what's coming up, behind you, yeah, for sure. Your path, like what's behind you. So you glance over your shoulder to make sure that it's clear, right? But you're accelerating, hopefully, onto that highway, and you're really paying attention to what's in front of you. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
So the point being is, along the way and starting impossible to possible, tons of setbacks, tons of no's, trying to get funding, tons of no's. I'm not focused on those setbacks. I'm focused on Bob and I said we were going to do this thing. We were going to make it happen. And we knew that we could make it happen. We could create something where young people could go on expeditions and it would be free. We knew that was the concept. Nobody would pay. It was 100% free. We could make it happen. It has not gotten any easier, but we make it happen. So we don't look at the little pieces or the little, if you want to call them failures or stops or bumps in the road along the way. We appreciate them as they happen and try to learn from them, but we stay more focused on the end goal. It's like you're always looking forward, you know?
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. So then how, like, as that applies to more of the kind of the adventure side of things and like a lot of these bigger treks that you're doing, how does that end up translating into something where you have to end up looking at a lot of the minutia and little details to make sure that when you're out in those situations, you have enough of, those things taken care of so that you can keep going and reach the end goal within those different treks?
Well, on my own expeditions, I take 2 years to plan. A youth-based expedition to the foundation takes us about a year to plan, but my own expeditions take about 2 years to plan, top to bottom, logistics and everything, because they're in very, very remote places. But even though I've had numerous successful crossings, occasionally the shit hits the fan and something bad happens, right? And in 2017, I was crossing a region of the Canadian Arctic with my teammate Stefano Gregoretti from Italy, and we are so in tune with one another. We've done multiple projects together. He barely speaks any English. I don't speak Italian, obviously. I try to add I and O to everything, and it doesn't really turn everything into Italian words. But he laughs at me. So, but we can communicate just by movement. We understand each other's movements. And for a long story short, I was scouting ahead on some ice through a slot canyon that we had to traverse, and I broke through, and he was behind me, and it it's a much more dramatic story if I told you the whole thing start to finish. But we were in a polar bear dense area. We had to keep moving, and that's why I was scouting up to this region so that we could get off this coastline. I broke through this ice, and there was tons of current in an area where it should be 30, 40 below consistently. There was a weird weather system in there, and the ice just happened to be not thick in the area where I was standing. And I know I train for this stuff. I know ice conditions. I understand the sound of ice when it's dense, and but at any rate, something happened and I broke through, and I almost died. I was almost pulled under the ice, and I had to get myself out because the whole area was fragile. So at any rate, I got myself out of the ice to a point, and I had my snowshoes on, which were also pulling me under and into this black void of rushing current that was going to pull me downriver under the ice. And I was able to push myself out with my crampon on the edge of this hole. And I was right on the edge of, I was hypothermic. And in my sled, all these years of Arctic expeditions, I had everything I need. I changed my clothes out immediately. I stripped down. I was on autopilot, dude. I was in a mega stressful situation. I knew exactly what I needed to do to save my life. And we spent the next 2 days trekking through a storm. And my boots, though, were filled with water. They became blocks of ice. My toes were frostbitten. The winds were 100 kilometers an hour, 60 miles an hour blowing, wind chills in the minus 50 range. And we had no choice but to move through this storm to get to a point where we could call a buddy of mine who was shooting photographs at the other end of this region that we were in. He was traveling with some Inuit hunters, and they were about 100K away from us to a point where they could come get us on snow machines, like a safe enough place for them to come get us. So we had to move for 2 days, and then we were stuck in for another 24 hours in our tent in this massive storm. This was the beginning of this Arctic expedition. I still had two more regions, different regions, even more heinous places in the Arctic to cross. Yet the first one had immediately become a failure. If you look at it, I wasn't able to finish, right? And so while we were sitting in our tent for 24 hours waiting for this storm to pass so those guys could come get us, Stefano and I were talking. And I said, he said, do you want to continue? Do you want to go up to Baffin Island? And I said, man, like the hypothermia was so bad I hadn't gone to the bathroom in 2 days. My body was just in shutdown mode. I felt horrible. And we talked about how on the youth-based expeditions, if it's not going well for these youth ambassadors, they twist an ankle and they're not able to run anymore. They have to reinvent themselves. That's what we tell them. We tell them, look, because you've had a wrench thrown into it, it doesn't mean you give up. You just got to find out who you are, what you're made of. You got to dig deep, and you got to, if you can't run, reinvent who it is that you are on the expedition, what your role is. And so I decided in that moment, if I'm going to say those words, if I'm going to preach them, I gotta do them. I got to follow through. And so we went on after that to complete successfully the next 2 legs of the Arctic expedition. That's how the expedition started. So to answer your question, a lot of times you plan these things, you plan down to the finest details. I plan my expeditions more than I plan my drive to the grocery store, right? But bad shit can happen. It's what you do when it happens. That's what counts. It's how you pull the rabbit out of the hat, right? So
yeah, so that was a very interesting thing you said there, where you're talking about reinventing yourself. How did you kind of come to that understanding? I'm assuming it was through a lot of these expeditions and just having come face to face with that multiple times and realizing that you needed a way to understand how to kind of reframe something in order to keep going. Like, why do you think that that is such a difficult thing for a lot of other people nowadays? Because I think, you talk about it as if it's just a piece of your life, and it's a tool that you have, and it's, something that you fall back on. But I think for a lot of other people, something goes wrong in their life and the whole thing kind of just falls apart.
Well, when I was competing in ultra marathons, a handful of the races that I competed in, I won. I was competitive, right? I don't race anymore because it takes me a year to plan for one expedition. Expeditions have taught me humbleness in what I do, that I have to approach it with humility. And you can't own nature or own the rights to success on an expedition. Nature will determine in the end if you're going to be successful or not. You aren't completely in control. You can only be in control to a certain point, but you have to accept ebbs and flows when you're doing these things. Now, going back to being the competitive runner, there's days when I'm having such great training runs. I'm thinking to myself, because I got this competitive spark, man, I would love to go out there and just see how I could do in a race, because I know I would give it my all. But if I get injured or if I have a setback in that, it's going to limit my training for my next expedition. Then I go into my next expedition and mentally I'm not 100% prepared, because I'm thinking back to the race I did 6 months ago. And I'm thinking, dude, maybe if you didn't do that race, you'd be more successful, right? In this expedition. So I try to really cross my T's and dot my I's and make sure I've done everything I can. If I know in my heart of hearts that I've prepared as best I possibly can, and then something goes wrong like it did in the Arctic, then there's only one option: reinvention or quit. And I'm not willing to quit. I will quit only if I absolutely have to. And then going back again to identity, personal identity, I think a lot of us have a stake in identity, in who we are based on what it is that we do, right? And I think that after all these years on expedition, I've learned that, I used to identify myself when I transitioned from mountain biking full time basically to running full time in 2004, that I was an ultra runner. That was who I was. But you know what? On my last expedition, not this very last one I just ran 2,000K across Namibia, but the expedition before that, one part of it was I skied across Baffin Island unsupported, and it was really difficult for me, really difficult, because I'm not a skier, right? Where I live, where I come from in Quebec, cross country skiing and that's backcountry skiing is a huge thing. It's like hockey here. Like it's everybody does it, right? But it just wasn't my thing because I was spending so much time running. But I wanted to go out there. I wanted to reinvent myself and do something new, pull away from that identity that perhaps I'd given myself. That I'm not just, I don't want to say to myself, okay, you're an ultra runner, but don't rest on that laurel. That's not just what you do. Try other things, go and do these other things. And these are transitionary things. I've done fat bike expeditions as well in the Arctic, 2 of them. So, is that running thing? No. So I think we have to be willing to sort of look at ourselves now and then and say, who am I? Right. And what is it that drives me? Is it a set of words or is it a title, or is there an assumption I have of myself, or am I willing to reinvent and try new things in my life and take some risks. And if you fall flat, well, at least you learn something from it, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
truly do.
Yeah, I completely agree. So then it's interesting because I think looking back on a lot of the things that someone does in life, and I think specifically with you, just because of all the accomplishments that you've had, it's easy to kind of say like this led to this, led to this, and like kind of seeing it as like more of like a buttoned up thing as you're looking back. But were there any moments throughout that, which I'm sure there probably are many, where you felt a little bit more confused about um, a set of decisions or like a path that you wanted to make, whether that was more of a bigger picture thing or something as small as like a simple decision that you made while you were on one of those treks?
Yeah, you know what? Because you and I are having a conversation that's roughly half an hour, 45 minutes long. We're talking about 20 years almost of life, 20 years, right? So obviously, massive setbacks along the way, multiple times of self-doubt, of wondering if this is the right decision. Am I doing the right thing? Maybe I should have never done this. You know what I mean? And then other times when there's extreme highs, when something great happens, success on an expedition, whatever, So to say, to button it up in a chronological story, yeah, it sounds that way. But obviously, like everything in life, there's tides, right? There's ebbs and flows, there's back and forth, there's light and darkness, right? And if I've learned anything about from these expeditions about life in general, is that there is consistently trade-offs in life, right? Like you can't have the best times in your life and the successes if you don't have massive downs, because then you wouldn't notice the difference, right? So they
Yeah.
kind of come with each other. I know that doesn't really answer your question, but I forgot what we were talking about.
It's all good. It was more so around like that idea of having those setbacks and those highs. Like, were there any pieces in particular that you can look back and say like this one thing was something that I really struggled with, and then
Yeah,
like how
I'll
you
tell you. I'll
worked?
tell you a huge one. Bad
That
water
would be
Ultra.
great.
So
Yes. Okay.
when
I
I
was
was
going to bring that up because I had seen
yeah
that on like some list of stuff that you'd done.
yeah. So when I was racing, um, I'd done a ton of, I can't remember which ultra marathon I did. I think it was the Marathon des Sables in Morocco. I
Hmm.
did it for the second time before going to Badwater. It was my second year of running. I'd been running for a year and a half, and I went to the Marathon des Sables, and I was just going after it as hard as I could, and I had a really great race. I did really well. And then I was getting myself ready for Badwater. And I thought, well, I mean, it's a 135-mile road race. How bad can it possibly be? And I am telling you, I imploded it after about 40 miles to a point where I was on my back and passed out and not knowing what the hell happened to me. Right.
Wow.
And when I finally came to, and they were giving me all kinds of Gatorade and everything to try and get me back, and I tried to get started again, I just couldn't do it. And I DNF'd. And remember, this was when I was first starting out. Right. And I came home and I thought, geez, maybe I thought I was this great runner in the heat and ultra runner, and I did all these races and the Yukon and everything else, and I completely tanked. Maybe it was all just luck. Those other ones, maybe it had nothing to do with anything about me being good at this stuff. Maybe I got lucky in those other ones, but this is how it really is, because everything else in my life, I mean, I was always careful to try and not slip back into the depressions that I would have in the first 30 years.
Hmm.
But things like this would happen. And I'd think to myself, geez, like, maybe I do suck as much as I did the first 30 years of my life in my mind. Right. And a friend of mine called me at that point and said, look, it didn't go well for you. You love the desert. Why don't you, there's this race in Egypt. Why don't you try for training for it? It was going to be in September. I believe it was the first week of September. It was in September, and Badwater had happened. It was in July. And he said, why don't you try this and just go back and just go and run it and try and complete it. And I thought, oh, because I really doubted that I was going to do any more races after Badwater. I just wasn't sure I was going to. This was in 2005. So I just thought, well, all right, I'll go give it a shot and see what happens. I went, I did it, I won it. And then I won my next race after that in Libya. And then with my teammates that I ran across the Sahara, won a race in China. And so it said to me, those setbacks, dude, I'm telling you, the things that went wrong in Badwater, I stopped taking anything for granted in my training. And I think I was taking things for granted.
Mhm.
And right away, I dove into what went wrong and I owned it. It was on me. It wasn't that it was this or that. There was no excuses. I blew it completely. It was on me. I blew it. I didn't drink enough. I wasn't doing all these. There's multiple strategies that I was not doing because I didn't think I needed to. And I got cocky and I paid a huge price for it. And so I applied all those things into my training and everything else and started to approach it more humbly. And then I had those successes. And then I ran across the Sahara Desert after that. And as a matter of fact, I went back in 2011 with a guy named Will Laughlin to Death Valley. And I crossed from the North Park boundary, starting at about 6,500 feet, all the way across Death Valley National Park to the South Park boundary. So going from, let's say, 6,500 feet down below sea level, back up to 5,000 feet. We crossed the entire valley, a distance about 250K, completely off road. And we're going to go back again at the end of this July and try and retrace our route that we did. I've also been back to that race to crew it for other runners multiple times since. So, it sort of was like, I discovered this other part of Death Valley that I really liked and that I was compelled to do. The race itself, the timing was never there. It just wasn't there for me to go back and actually do that race again and try and finish it. Although I get teased a lot by my buddies who doesn't want me to go back and do it. But now with the expeditions, like I say, I'm so committed to what it is that I'm doing that, it takes so long. I don't want to, I know how I work mentally and I want to stay focused. So.
Yeah. That's incredible. So is that like kind of off topic a little bit, but was that where the desert side of things came from? Because I noticed that like that seems to be kind of a connecting thread between a lot of the treks that you do. Most of them are through deserts. Is that correct?
Well, I would say most, but that includes Arctic deserts as well. Like
Yeah.
I love the Canadian Arctic so much. It's the last frontier. You know what I mean? It's so out there and it's so extreme, and I prefer the heat to the cold, but I can do the cold, and it's just so hard to do. It's so hard. There's so many variables when you're on. And then when you're on a cold weather expedition, when I do the cold expeditions, they're completely self-contained and unsupported, right? So that means everything is with us in our sleds. There's nobody with us, just us. So any photographer, videographers, anything, they catch us at the beginning and they catch us at the end, and then we shoot everything ourselves in between. So because sharing stories from the expeditions is critical to me. If a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? If I'm out there, I want students to be able to tune into my own expeditions as well. So I'm always using technology in any way that I can, social media, everything I can to share the projects that I'm on.
Yeah. So then that's the kind of the next step of things is like, what was the thought process like of going from doing a lot of these treks and dealing with your like the mental, physical, everything side of your own piece of that, and then wanting to take that to other people? And what did that kind of transition start to look like?
Well, because of running the Sahara, right? That's almost been a downhill, if you think about it, because running the Sahara, we had an Academy Award-winning director, James Moll. We had an Academy Award-winning narrator and producer, Matt Damon. You had like Harrison Dunn on camera lead. I think he shot like Men in Black or something. These people were like crazy good at their craft. And I'd never seen a camera before running the Sahara. I had a point and shoot, right? Mm-hmm. We didn't have iPhones, remember? So this is 2007, 2006, right? So, I was just completely blown away by what they could create and how passionate they were about creating stories. And I'm like, the amount of effort they put into taking one photograph was ridiculous. And I thought, wow, there's potency there. And so I knew that I would make it a goal of my own to learn how to shoot as well as I can. I'm nothing compared to the guys that help out. There's so many, Zach Shields, Ryan Richardson, John Golden, our photographer, Natalia Gubervera, another person who works on my team. So there's these people that are content creators that really know what they're doing, and they go with us and they help out and shoot. Yeah, Namibia. You saw the videos from Namibia. They're epic. Ryan Richardson shot all those, and we shot some POV stuff. And then Ryan edited it. We upload it using satellite to social media and to a live website. Students and schools can tap in and people around the world can follow the expedition if they want to. And it's quality content. And that's important to me, sharing the experience. So where did it come from? It came from running the Sahara. When you see a movie like that and it just, the time they put it, forget us, forget the three runners, but you see the way you see North Africa in that film. I mean, will Libya be filmed again? I don't know. It'll be a while probably. So anyhow, I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah. So then, and then that transitioned into kind of the impossible to possible thing, right? And then that's how you ended up kind of roping up all of this stuff into one thing, so that as you're going out into these expeditions, you're not only doing a lot of these physical feats yourself and with your partners in a team, but then you're also bringing all those kids into that experience and trying to like get them more involved with what that process is like. Is that how that,
well,
that
more or less. I
thinking of
mean,
it?
the youth-based expeditions, the way they work is with Impossible to Possible, by the way, if anybody wants to check it out. The way it works is the youth ambassadors are selected 5 or 6, well, between 4 and 6, depending on how much money we have for that expedition. And they're between the ages of 16 and 21. And then they go on these expeditions and create content, shoot their experience, and then teach a curriculum that's related to their expedition to students all over the world using satellites. So let's use, we went to the Amazon jungle twice. And one time we taught the subject of biodiversity from the Amazon. So youth ambassadors would interview people in indigenous communities, learn about the biodiversity of the area, answer students' questions that would come through a website, and then they would post the content through this live website. And then we would do live video conferences with schools from the jungle. So it's that kind of stuff. It's an immersive experience. So these youth ambassadors go on these expeditions, and they're remote. We've done Bolivia, Rajasthan, Peru, Brazil, Tunisia, Canadian Arctic. I can't even think of them all. And they're peer-to-peer teaching, right? So it's a very effective way of inspiring youth.
Yeah, awesome. So then what was the thinking behind, the youth inspiring youth piece? Why not just continue to upload your own content and kind of push your message out there in that way? Like, what was the thinking about how you started to create that
Because when
whole?
I was 16, 17 years old, I would sit in my classroom and I would be staring at the teacher and not hear a word that they had to say. I was completely uninspired and just wanted to go, smoke dope and drink beer in a van. I just really did not want to hear anything that they had to say. And I just had no desire to learn. And so I wanted to, and Bob and Kathy, when we started this, we wanted to find a way to engage with that 16 and 17-year-old, or as many kids as we possibly could, and show them the world, and that young people their age are out there doing really cool stuff that's hard to do, and learn about subjects that open and expand their horizons the same way that the Sahara did for me. It's never too late. Look, we can start anytime because, like I told you, it's middle age for me.
Mhm.
But save a 16-year-old a ton of time, right? Or, that's maybe sitting on the fence about being inspired. We've had youth on our expert because there's no economic or religious or any sort of barriers, a social barrier to coming on an expedition. You can be from anywhere and be anyone and come on one of these expeditions if you're chosen through the application process. And which I don't choose the youth ambassadors, by the way. And we've had kids that have come from some pretty, they've had a rough start, right, in their lives. And things were looking kind of bleak, and then they come out and do this, and they not only turn their own lives around, they turn the youth in their community's lives around, right? Because they're inspiring, because they're like, if that dude can do that, I can do anything, is what the other ones are saying, right? So
Mhm.
that's the whole deal there. But I have
That's,
to wrap up because unfortunately I have another meeting coming. I hate
no
to do this
worries.
to you,
It's all good. We'll have to get on another one, except for I'll try and make sure that this one doesn't take months to plan like
No,
this
it's
one
all
did.
it's totally. I have I'm like 75% to blame. Totally. So
It's all good. So, closing comments. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add, just based on the conversation that we had so far, and like
Yeah,
anything
you know what?
else.
As cheesy as it sounds to people that are listening, and I'm not sure what your demographic is or your millions of listeners, because I know you have millions of listeners,
I hope.
who they are. But look, at I would say to people again, I'm caveating this. This is the cheesy's coming at you, but stop talking yourself out of doing things. I mean, for the people out there that know what I'm talking about, I spent 30 years of my life talking myself out of trying anything for fear of how badly it was going to end or what was going to happen or what someone would think. Like we can predict a negative outcome before even trying. And now I live my life the other way, right? I calculate the risk to a point and then I take a chance and it's on me, right? And it's liberating. It's a liberating way to live because you're willing to try new things, and it can be something super simple, like getting off the couch and going for a walk instead of thinking, oh, why bother? Well, I'll tell you why bother, because it's good. It's a great thing to do, and I've had, I'll leave you with this too. I've had people say to me, I don't have time to exercise. I've got like 5 minutes and that's it before work. That's all. I'm like, hey, that's 5 minutes. 5 minutes is better than nothing. Literally, that has been scientifically proven. 5 minutes is better than nothing. You can just do it, like make that decision to try something.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Is there spots that people can find more of your info at, whether
Yeah,
it's your
you know what?
personal stuff or?
I'm trying to be cool and I'm trying to use my Instagram more. So go you get find me on Instagram. This is Ray Zahab on Instagram. I have a Facebook, a public page that I post there routine. Me on that at just my Ray Zahab with a blue check beside my name. And my website, rayzahab.com.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, have a great rest of your day, and I appreciate you being on.
Thank you so much. We'll catch you later.
Yep. Take it easy.
Okay, bye-bye.